If you have your Bibles, please, the book of 2 Timothy, chapter 1. This great theme of this conference, grace. Grace. Dr. Chappell and I were in the Orient a number of years ago now. And while we were there, some of the missionaries came and they said, "Would you be kind enough to come play golf with us?" And I said, "Boy, I used to play a lot of golf, but I said, I don't play golf anymore." I was on the college golf team, had part scholarship for golf. But Dr. Chappell said, "Oh, come on, Brother Gibbs, it'll be a blessing. We'll bless these missionaries and let's play a little golf with them." I said, "Okay." Well, we showed up at the golf course and met these wonderful missionaries, and all the way out there I'm saying, man, let's just be a blessing to them. And when you haven't swung a golf club in a while, how many of you know you pray, "Don't let me embarrass myself"? Well, it's my turn to hit the ball. And the fairway is that way. And the missionaries are right over here. Now, what happened to my golf ball is aerodynamically impossible. You couldn't do this if you had a gun. I lined up and took a mighty swing and I hit the ball. But the ball didn't go that way. It went that way. And I nailed a missionary right in the chest. The guy fell down like he was dead. I thought, sweet Alabama, I have killed a missionary. And my dear friend, Brother Chappell, he said, uh-oh. It's what happened next is the whole reason I tell you the story. It hit the guy. He went down like a sack of potatoes. And the missionaries there with him, started praying and running to him. Mercifully, the guy did not die. But what he did was he rolled over and started cussing at me. Cussing. And Brother Chappell said, "Oh, you're really blessing the missionaries now." I want you to hear me. That golf ball did not put that in him. That was already there. What that golf ball did was unleash what was in him. And I wish with all my heart it hadn't been my shot. Because all I could think of is, if I recall right, he'd been on the field 20-some years, maybe more. And for the entire day, nobody knew what to say. You know what I think we forget? What's in you is what determines what you are. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. How many of you here have ever embarrassed yourself? Hold your hand up, would you? I climbed on an airplane early in the morning, and I'm not a morning person. Now, my precious wife is. But how many of you here, you just love getting up in the morning? Hold your hand up, would you? Ought to be legal to shoot you, all right? That's all I can warn you. I've got to catch a 5:10 flight, 5 a.m. And I get to the airport, and I got to catch this flight. I'm going to fly across country and be in Oregon and do a case and then preach in a Bible conference that night. But as I got on the airplane, what was in me wasn't real good. I took a look at the little seats that were in that plane. Now, I don't mean this unkind, but the seats they're putting in airplanes are ridiculous. I don't know who they're crafting them for, but it's not human. And what I've discovered is that when I sit down and wedge myself into one of those seats, I do not need a seatbelt. I don't. Turn this baby upside down. I'm not going anywhere. And I've often thought, man, when they say, in the event of an emergency, I thought, if there's an emergency, me and this seat are leaving together. And as bad as they are this way is this way. I've told everybody, when the guy in front of you leans back, you could do dental work on him. His head is in your lap. Well, I'm just not in a good mood looking at those seats. And I recall exactly what I said. There's a flight attendant standing there, a Delta flight attendant. And I said, those are the puniest, most ridiculous seats I've ever seen. I didn't say anything about her. I criticized the seats. Like that, she let me have it. People are all around us. I told her those are puny, ridiculous seats. And loud, she raised her voice and she looked at me and she said, well, you could lose weight, Oh, and I thought, this is just what I need. The mouth of the South at 5 a.m. Now, when she said that, it hit something in me. Just like my golf ball hit something, that hit something. She said, you could lose weight, and I said, you know what, you're exactly right, and you could get prettier. Hey, don't you look at me. She started it. I'm just wrapping it up. I said, you are one of the most seriously cosmetically challenged people I've ever met. I said, I don't know how to tell you this, but when you fell out of the tree, you didn't miss a branch on the way down. Now, I'm just smacking her. And the people around me start clapping. And there was a businessman there, and he got his pen out, and he said, where'd you get that? Say it again. I want to write it down. I'm being awful. The problem wasn't her. The problem was what's in here. I'm putting my coat up overhead, and as I put it up there, it was sort of on an angle. And the minute it went up, a couple of tracks just slid right out. And I picked them up and put them back. And like that, the Lord said, probably not a good idea to give her one. A little bit later, I walked up by her, and she's up there crying and got some other ladies around her. And then one flight attendant, see, now you made her cry. And boy, I had all I could do not to say more. I said, I know, I'm sorry, but I said, I want to tell you right now, what I did to you broke God's heart. I sinned. There's no excuse. And I said, I wouldn't blame you for not taking this, but please don't hold me against this. And I handed it to her. And two other ladies standing there said, have you got any more of those? That lady looked at me and she said, I've been a Delta flight attendant for 22 years. And in 22 years, nobody's apologized to me. I said, well, I am. Because I did you wrong. Went back. It was a short flight just from Tampa up to Atlanta. When I'm getting off the plane, the captain is standing by the door with that flight attendant. And as I'm walking along, I see her pointing at me. And she's telling the captain, the big one in the blue suit, the big one. And I thought, oh boy, here it goes. How many of y'all ever had your mouth get you in trouble, right? I walked up by him and he said, I want to congratulate you. He said, I'm a born-again Christian. And he said, you made the Lord look good today. I said, I don't think you got the whole story. He said, no, I did. He said, you didn't take off too smooth, but you landed well. Tonight, I want to ask you what's in you. Tonight, I'm going to ask you to do some heart examination. Do you know why our world is dying and going to hell? It's not for the lack of power in the gospel. It's because of what's in us, what's in our hearts. I love what Charles Spurgeon said. He said, you don't have to prove to me that you're called to be a missionary, because he said every Christian's called to be a missionary. He said, you have to prove to me that God called you not to go to a foreign field. That's the call. Paul, writing to Timothy in 2 Timothy, is going to use the word grace 3 times in the passage we're going to look at tonight. I'm going to ask you to look at your own heart for a while, not the person around you, but yours. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God, according to the promise of life which is in Christ Jesus, to Timothy, my beloved brethren, our beloved son, grace, now circle grace. That's the power of God, God's riches at Christ's expense. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Jesus Christ our Lord. I thank God whom I serve from my forebears with pure conscience, and without ceasing I have remembrance of thee in my prayers night and day, greatly desiring to see thee, being mindful of thy tears, that I may be filled with joy. When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dealt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that in thee also. But now verse 6 starts the first point. Wherefore I put thee in remembrance, that thou stir up the gift of God which is in thee by the putting on of my hands. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind. There's no way to be what God wants us to be without the right spirit. And you know what the Word of God says? The spirit that God's got to put in you, that he's got to put in us, is not a spirit of fear. That word fear there was the word for hesitation. It was the word for uncertainty. It was the word for dread. I'm just not sure. And God says, stop it. Mine is not a spirit of uncertainty. Mine is not a spirit of dread. Ours is not a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. The first question I want to ask you is, have you got that power? Is that in you? Is that in me? Do you understand? We're not called to live the Christian life in our power, because no one here can do it. Jesus said, without me, ye can do nothing. But he said, I'm going to give you a spirit of power that will change everything. I was traveling through the Chicago airport, and it was a Monday morning. It was busy. It was jammed. And I'm walking down a concourse, not really paying much attention, and out of nowhere I hear my name. David Gibbs, Brother Gibbs, over here, hey. And I look over, and here's a guy. I don't recognize him, but he knows me somewhere. Oh, David Gibbs. And he's got two enormous bundles in his hand. And there's twine wrapped around them. And he comes running over by me, and we're in the middle of this concourse. People are just going zippity zip. And he puts the packages down, and he says, oh, you are such an answer to prayer. This is just wonderful. Man, you're just such an answer to prayer. You're wonderful. And I said, well, great. I said, I don't know how, but did our ministry do something for you? He said, no. He said, it's what you're going to do for me. I said, what is it I'm going to do for you today? He said, well, Brother Gibbs, we just finished our missions conference. And he said, every year, my wife and I try to give really good for missions. And this year we told God we'd give 5 a week. 5 a week. And he said, I know that's a lot, but 5 a week. When he said 5 a week, something just clicked in me. I thought, I wonder what he means. He wouldn't be bragging about $5 a week. I wonder if he means $50 a week. Oh, man, I wonder if he means $500 a week. I said, you give God 5 a week? He said, oh, yeah. I said, is that $50? He said, oh, no, 5. I said, 500? He said, no. I said, did you give God a commitment for 5,000 a week? He said, yeah. And I'm thinking, I want to meet this guy. I'm thinking now how you can be a blessing to me. I said, you give 5,000 a week? He said, yeah, I have for the last 6 years. I said, that's $250,000 a year. He said, I can add, I know. He said, that's above and beyond my tithe. I thought, wow. But he said there was a problem. He said, last night at our church, Sunday night, when I told God I'd give the 5 a week, God said, I want more. And so I told God, well, how much more? And he said, it's not a number, I want you. Good. And he said, at the end of the service, I walked forward and I put myself in the basket. Now he said, I'm no good at this. He said, I get nervous talking to people. And all the way over here on the airplane, I told my pastor, give me these bundles of tracts. I'll hand them out in the Chicago airport. But all the way over here, I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, boy, that's way too many for me to do. And so I started praying, God, you got to give me somebody to help me. And he said, the minute I got off the plane, you walked by. He said, boy, are you a blessing? What a blessing. He said, now I'm praying for power. And he said, I know you probably do this all the time, but he said, I'm just scared to death. But like that, he tears one of the bundles open, hands me a couple of the tracts, picks up some himself, and here's what he said, help us, Jesus, we got to have your power. And he starts handing them out. And people walking by, he's telling them, you're going to get on a plane, you better get ready to die. Here you go. That's what he said. And I'm standing there watching him. Now, 2 Chicago policemen walk up. And the policeman said, you can't do that here. And he said, sure I can. And he hands each of them one. He said, sure I can. They said, no, it's against the law. He said, no, my lawyer's right here with me. We're doing it together. Just like that. The policeman turned to me and said, you a lawyer? I said, yeah. And he said, well, you with him? And I said, well, it kind of looks that way, don't it? Come on, Brother Gibbs, be bold. Police said, you got to go stand over here. And boy, he said, okay, as long as we can hand out tracts all the way over there. And he's handing them out, and people are standing around reading them everywhere. Amen. I said, Brother Gibbs, you just don't understand. I can't do this. But my pastor said that my God would give me power. How much of the Christian life are you trying to pull off without his power? Nothing can take the place of that power. We handed out those tracts, and he said, pray for me. He said, I think maybe God's calling me to go to the field. He said, I can't imagine it. Ours is not a spirit of fear, but of power. If you haven't got that power in your heart and your spirit, I beg you, don't leave here without it. Look at the second thing it says. Ours is not a spirit of fear, but of power and of love. And of love. 2 young missionaries on the field in South America were lured in by cannibals, feigning to be friendly. Jim Elliott and Nate Saint. And as they lured them in, the goal was to get them to get close enough where they could kill them. Jim Elliott had just married his wife Elizabeth a short while before. She was pregnant with their first child. And these savages got these 2 men in close enough where they could grab them. And then they mercilessly tortured them. And they killed them and they ate them. Word got back to Elizabeth at the base camp. And she said, I was shattered. But she said, I knew what I was supposed to do. I was to love them Do you understand you are commanded by the God you serve to love your enemies? To bless them? Do good to them? Is that in here? They asked Elizabeth Elliot, what do you want to do? Do you want to go back to the States? She said, no. I want you to take me to those men who killed my husband. And they said, you don't want to go there. They'll try to kill you. But we'll send a lot of armed men with you. And she said, no, no armed men, none. They have to understand the Spirit of God that I have. A spirit of power and a spirit of love. They took her in, and this precious young lady, I had the privilege several times to speak with Elizabeth Elliot, and I said, when you went in there, were you scared? She said, my knees shook so hard I didn't know if I could stand. But she said, Brother Gibbs, I knew I loved him. And I told him I loved him. And it terrified them. Those savages all came to know Christ as Savior because of Elizabeth Elliot. You say, well, nothing like that's happened to me, Brother Gibbs. You got to have the right spirit. The spirit of power and the spirit of love and the spirit of a sound mind. I promise you, when you get ready to do something for God, people will try to unravel your mind. You're too old. You're too weak. You've made too many mistakes. By the way, how many of you here have made some mistakes? Hold your hand up, would you? Yeah. How many of you made some that could only be classified as whoppers? Hold your hand up. And how many of you did it more than one time? Hold your hand up. You know what the spirit of a sound mind is? This spirit isn't resting on you. It's resting on the grace of the God you serve. The grace of the God who wants to use you. That's what took Elizabeth Elliot in there. In 3 years' time, before Elizabeth Elliot withdrew, she had won over 3,500 of these savages to Christ. How's your spirit? How's mine? The first thing is you got to have a right spirit. But write the second thing down, you got to have a right attitude. Starting at verse 8. Be not thou therefore ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, nor of me his prisoner. But be thou partaker of the afflictions of the gospel, according to the power of God. Not in your power, his power, who hath saved us and called us with a holy calling, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and, say out loud the next word, grace. There's that word the second time, which was given us in Christ Jesus before the world began. You'll never have a right attitude without a right spirit. That's why the devil's going to do everything he can to get your spirit crosswise. But with a right spirit, you can have a right attitude. I was with some missionaries in Thailand. And I'll never forget, my son Matthew, who's now a pastor here in Southern California, was with me. And we're staying in a house, a mission house. And in the middle of the night, my son reaches over and rustles my arm, and he said, "Are you making that noise?" I said, "No, I thought you were making that noise." He said, "There is something on the ceiling." And he said, "Whatever it is, it's leaving footprints." And I said, No, come on, don't get spooked. I said, real slow, go over there and flip on the light. Mistake of a lifetime. In front of my son, when he flipped on that light, I screamed like a teenage girl. Hanging on the ceiling over our head was Godzilla's cousin. There was a lizard whose body was that long and whose tail was longer. And it's got this red throat going in and out. And it's hanging right over us. I screamed so loud, the missionary's wife came running. And I said, "You won't believe what's in you. You got a gun? What have you got? We got to kill it." She said, No. Those are our friends. I said, "Those are your friends?" She said, "They keep the poisonous snakes from coming up out of the ground into the house. So if we take them out of the way, the snakes come up." I said, I don't suppose you got a motel around here anywhere, do you? I'll take a no-name motel. I'll take anything right now. Man, I sat there all night watching that guy. Poof, poof. In the morning we got up, there were spiders everywhere. And these guys were big. I mean, their bodies are like, yay, not their legs, their bodies. They're big enough that you can tell when they have attitude. And she said, you can crush them, you know. And I reached over to step on one, and really when I come down on him, he didn't pop. And I backed up, and he looked at me, and I said, "Hey, no harm, right?" I said, how in the world are you guys here? They said, "Well, Brother Gibbs, you're going to see something really good today. We understand you know how to slaughter a pig." I said, "I do. My family was in the slaughtering business. I know how to slaughter a pig." They said, "Well, we bought a pig, and we're going way, way, way up into the mountains. And we're going to a tribe where if we bring the chief a pig and slaughter it for him, there's 1,000 kids up there we're going to get the gospel to." I said, "Oh, great." Well, now, when they said a pig, I thought they meant a little piglet. They pulled a car up with a 400-pound sow in the back seat who was very upset. And this sow is decorating everything. I said, "That's a big pig." "Oh," he said, "it's got to be bigger. It won't work." Well, I didn't understand. It was going to be a 6-hour drive with a mad pig. Now we get up there, and boy, the people are all excited, and here's the chief. And they're explaining to him, I'm going to do the sacrifice of the pig. And I said, don't call it a sacrifice. I'm going to say, kill the thing. And they said, you got to do it with the chief's knife. I said, okay, a knife's a knife, we can do it. They hand me the chief's knife, and it's all rusty, it has no edge, and there's no point on it. And I'm supposed to slit this pig's throat with a knife that you couldn't cut yourself with if you tried. I said, this is not going to work. They said, no, they'll help you hold it down. You just got to kill it for them. Took me 20 minutes to get that knife in that pig. And I'm apologizing to the pig. I'm saying, hey, this wasn't my idea. I'm just trying. Finally, I get it in. He's now bleeding out. And the next thing I know, they're collecting the blood. Now they come to me and they say, the chief wants to drink the first glass, and he wants you to drink the warm blood with him. Not in this lifetime. No. That pig blood, you kidding me? So they hand it to me, and I'm holding it. And the chief is just swilling it down. And I'm thinking, this thing's full of trigonosis and everything else. And the missionary said, Brother Gibbs, the kids. How's your attitude? Do you know what it says in this passage? That we're to have an attitude where we understand by the grace of God, we have the power of God. And I don't know what God's going to ask you to do. But here's what I know. There's a whole world out there that needs the gospel. And we're living this lifestyle in America. We're so spoiled. We live like kings and queens. And the attitude of me doing something like that, so those kids for the first time in their life could hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. It'll change everything. But you got to have the right spirit. And God, by your power, by your grace, I'm going to have the right attitude. Write the third and final thing down. Chapter 2, verse 1. You got to have the right endurance. Thou therefore, my son, be strong, and here it is the third time, in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men, who shall be able to teach others also. Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. But I hope you put a star by verse 4. No man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who hath chosen him to be a soldier. What's got you entangled? What's got you kept where, boy, the thought of me going to some third world country, the thought of me leaving home and all the luxuries we live with here and just take for granted, What's got you tied? What's got you entangled? The greatest opposition in America is not from liberals. The greatest opposition to us reaching the world is our own luxuries and the comfort level with which we live. What would it take for you to put your luxuries and say, Lord, this belongs to you? The Bible says the day you got saved, that you were purchased. And you no longer belong to you. You've been bought with a price. It says, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are Christ's. When's the last time you said, God, I don't belong to me, I belong to you, here I am? And then he gives a great warning. He says in Romans 12, I want you to be a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. When's the last time you said, God, I don't belong to me. None of my stuff belongs to me. It's all yours. And God, I want to be a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto you. A Russian pastor was put in jail for preaching the gospel in the 60s and 70s. And they tortured him mercilessly. They deformed him. They did everything they could to get him to say, I'll no longer preach Jesus. They said, you can hold church, just don't say Jesus. Finally, they decided, we're never going to break him, but we know something that we think he loves more than his Jesus. And they brought his oldest child in. And they said, we have tortured you mercilessly now for 6 or 7 years. And we can't break you. But are you willing to watch your child pay the price? And they said, what we're going to do is fasten you to this cell. We're going to bring your daughter in. And we're going to give you the chance to denounce Christ. And if you won't, we're going to take hot pokers and put them in each of her ear canals and deafen her. And then we're going to take her tongue and we're going to cut it out. Does your Jesus mean that much to you? He pled with them. He said, do anything to me, anything. Don't harm my child. He did what every father here would do. I love what her daughter told him. She said, Dad, don't you dare turn on Jesus. Don't you dare. Remember, we're living sacrifices, Dad. And they deafened and muted that precious child. A week later, they brought his second child in and did the same thing. And that child said, don't you turn on Jesus. We're living sacrifices. And they did it to his third child. When the wall came down, this pastor, along with 400 others, were freed from jail for the first time. And a pastor friend of mine was in the meeting where this pastor gave his testimony. his body mangled from all the abuse he had taken. But he said, to the grace of God, I did not deny Jesus. My friend noticed 3 young ladies sitting on the side. And he asked, he said, are those his daughters, the ones that they committed these horrible acts on? And I said, yeah. And he got someone who could sign to go over with them. And he said, I just want to tell you, you're heroes to me. He said their hands in unison began to say, it was our reasonable service. Our reasonable service. Are you ready to reach this world? My prayer is that you and I don't run into the things that many are hitting right now. But it's going to take somebody to say, Lord, I belong to you. And half this planet has never heard the name Jesus. And by your grace, I'm not my own. And by your grace, I want you to use me. I want to have the right spirit. I want to have the right attitude. And I want to be that living sacrifice. I'm convinced as never before, this is the greatest hour to be a Christian that's ever existed in the history of the world. Because we have the ability to reach this world for Christ. Now the question is, what's in your heart? What's in mine? And will we have the right spirit, the right attitude, and the right living sacrifice? Tonight, some of you are going to make decisions that I don't believe you ever walked in here thinking you'd make. Because God's already speaking to your heart. By His grace, there's a world out there waiting for you. But you got to be willing to go. You got to be willing to come. Mr. Moody, I think you're right. If God hadn't specifically said, don't go, we're to go. You say exactly what Mr. Spurgeon says. And tonight, by the grace of God, we can go. What's in you? What's in me? It's time to reach this world.